Hello, Iranian Canadians. And hello, Israeli and Jewish brothers and sisters. What a reception. Thank you all for coming out. Thank you, Tafsik, for hosting us. Your Highness, thank you for... So I think there's, it's obvious, there's a love fest happening between the two communities. And probably because we have so much in common. Of course, Cyrus the Great is the theme of your remarks, and Emily mentioned Cyrus the Great. Many people may not realize, but in Israel today, there's a street in Jerusalem and there's a street in Tel Aviv called Koresh Street. That is Cyrus Street in Israel. And that is just a very small indication of the intertwined history that the Iranian people and Jewish people have. And let's just pick up with Cyrus the Great, Your Highness. You mentioned the long history that's rooted in Cyrus's liberation of the Jews from its Babylonian captivity. Cyrus not only freed the Jews to come to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple, but you may not know, but Cyrus actually funded the building of the temple in Jerusalem from the royal treasury. Which is probably why the regime hates Cyrus the Great. It calls Cyrus Day a Western Zionist plot and prevents Iranian people from going and paying tribute to Cyrus the Great. So I wanted to bring us back to this deep history that the Persian people, Jewish people, Israeli people have, and how you think it serves as a foundation for our future collaboration.
As I said in my speech and some interviews that I'm sure many of you might have heard, that it is really seldom you find two nations and two peoples who I truly believe their destinies are linked to one another. And I think the future that awaits Iranians and Israelis can only be a successful one when we put an end to this evil regime that has been the root cause of all the problems in the region, taking my compatriots as the first hostage and then continue spreading this venomous message of hatred and bigotry and anti-Semitism and whatever you have. We do not look at Israel only in our biblical relationship, although I'm sure many of you have seen how fellow Iranians have been marching in recent past demonstrations here in America, in Europe and elsewhere with the Iranian flag and the Israeli flag next to one another. And that demonstrates that this is not just a policy or a vision limited and restricted to some who look at it from a point of view of, diplomacy or foreign policy. This is truly embedded in our national psyche. If Iranians went to celebrate Cyrus the Great at his tomb, it was not just to recognize what Cyrus did to put Iran back then on the map in the form that the first declaration of human rights really came from Cyrus. Many times I hear people in the Western world say, we have in our values the values of freedom and human rights. I need to remind sometimes people that when Thomas Jefferson was looking at how the American Constitution was to develop, he was in fact inspired to a great degree by Cyrus the Great and his declaration 25 centuries ago. So the values of freedom and liberty and justice and equality and non-discrimination really started back then. And that makes us, as the children of Cyrus, truly proud. But then again, when you look at how important the strategic relationship and partnership that Iran and Israel can have, in building that future and helping our neighborhood to steer back into the light of stability and peace without the requirement of some superpower existing in the region with its military forces, that we can take care of business ourselves based on that mutual work and strategic partnership, it will be a completely different world. This is a game changer, and it all starts with two nations that have suffered enough, respectively, and can work together and set the standard and the example of how that future can be. And it all starts between Iranians and Israelis, because I think far too often we have realized that this can be a lonely fight, that we don't count on any other thing but ourselves to succeed. However, we all know that if more people were to come to help us, it will be a much easier struggle as opposed to a lonely struggle. So we really have this hugely important relationship that says, of course, we have that history, but what can we do from now towards our future to avert disaster, to avert calamity, and to change the course of history? And with that in mind, when I traveled to Israel almost 2 years ago, it was with a clear message, well beyond breaking the taboos. And incidentally, perhaps I was the first highest ranking Iranian representative to be in Israel since the liberation of Babylon. But to also say how critical it is that in a post-Islamic regime in Iran, imagine all the opportunities that Iran needs to have. Yes, of course, human rights, liberty, democracy, all of that, as they say back in America, is motherhood and apple pie. But does it put food on the table? How are we going to tell Iranians and the world what kind of impact it can have on our reconstruction, putting us back on the path of prosperity? And how much Israel has to contribute in view of their expertise, their technology, their water management knowledge that is truly important for us. It goes beyond just a friendly relationship. It is truly, in many aspects, critical for Iran's path to redevelopment. And we have a true ally in this because they understand the importance of that relationship. And that sets the bar and an example for others to follow and emulate. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Can
I kindly ask everyone, because we are restricted in time and would like to have more, please hold your cheers to the very end and not interrupt the question. Thank you. I know, I understand your emotions, but in the interest of maximizing the time that we have here, I would appreciate if you hold that.
They're ready for breakfast tomorrow morning. I actually, just for 1 second, you glossed over it. You mentioned your trip to Israel. I want everybody in this room to understand the historic importance of your trip to Israel. You mentioned that, not since the Babylonian times has an Iranian of your stature come to Israel. Well, not even Cyrus the Great came to Jerusalem and he helped build the temple. Not even Your Highness, your father, came to Jerusalem. You went to Jerusalem and you bridged 2,500 years of history. And when you walked up to the western wall of the temple that Cyrus the Great freed the Jews to build and help finance, you connected the era of Cyrus the Great to the future of the Iranian people, and you deserve a lot of credit for that.
Thank you.
And
thank
you. And history is not going to be reversed. The die has been cast, and you have now played a role in the legacy of these two ancient people. So I just want to make sure that you get the credit that you deserve in this room here.
Thank you so much.
So let's talk about the future. Everybody here has witnessed the Abraham Accords between Israel and its Arab neighbors that has reversed decades of animosity and has painted a picture of promise and hope and possibilities for the new generation of Arabs and Jews and Christians and anyone else living in the region. The only problem is that the Iranian youth, the Iranian people, are watching history evolve, are watching Abraham Accords take place, and are prevented by the regime from taking part in this process of reinvention of their neighborhood. So I think this is where the idea of Cyrus Accords comes in. Cyrus Accords, of course, is just a vision, and you've alluded to it a number of times, and you've mentioned it, and no one deserves history of being rekindled more than Cyrus the Great. So the idea of the Jewish people and the grandchildren of Abraham and the grandchildren of Cyrus of reuniting in history is a natural thing. And Cyrus Accords, hopefully, will take place in not too distant future between Israel and a free Iran. But it's one thing for us to be able to just talk about it. Wouldn't it be great? And of course, everybody in this room believes that it would be a great idea. But is it realistic? And how do the Iranian people feel about the Jewish people? And what are the real possibilities of striking a peace deal with a future for Iran and creating a new legacy, rekindling on the old legacy?
Well, I think today we have some measuring tools in terms of understanding what's the temperature or the public opinion of this or that country and its population. Social media has a great role to play in it, because before, in the older times, how would we find out about one another, or maybe limited media talking about it? But if you wanted to gauge the sentiments of a nation and the reciprocity of their emotions towards one another, in the last few years I've witnessed a tremendous amount of traffic of messages going back and forth between Iran and Israel, between the Jews and the Iranians, because they realize that they have a common enemy and they have a common fight. And nobody will understand it better than my compatriots and the Israeli people when we talk about Hamas, when we talk about Hezbollah, when we talk about the regime's proxies, their terror. And that's why it was so shocking that some in the world didn't understand that continuing a policy of containment and appeasement, and more importantly, throwing a lifeline to the regime by allowing them to have access to the kind of money that they shouldn't have had in the first place, that did not go to help the starvation of the Iranian people on the streets, but funding these proxies to the point that I don't think October 7th was an accident. These are the consequences of not looking at the solution the right way. And yes, the reason I was talking about the Cyrus Accords, among other things, is that I cannot envisage a Middle East having the stability that it deserves without Iran playing a critical role in it, perhaps a key role. But which Iran is the question? Let's not go too far. The role Iran played before the revolution was a key element in maintaining regional peace and stability, while having cordial relationship with all of our neighbors, even with the Soviet Union back then. But ever since the revolution, what has happened? Which direction has our region taken? And why is this region abilities to survive or dependency on continuing fomenting instability and conflict as a means to survive has so far maintained its position? And why is it that I've always argued that if you want to have a true partner in peace, seek the peacemakers. Don't try to cut a deal with the warmongers. That's what's wrong with the picture. And as long as you don't consider that your true alternative, and by the way, something that will put an end to all the various aspects that are somehow connected to this regime in Iran, not just a nuclear threat, but everything else associated with it. You can wipe it all up with one stroke of the hand by just eliminating the root cause of it. Before coming here, as we were visiting the display of what unfortunately happened in that festival that turned disastrous. I was thinking the fact that, once again, what is the root cause? For 40 years we have witnessed the world trying to put out a fire that was lit here or there. But what once have anybody thought that who has the matchbox? Who is the arsonist? What is the source? Where's the money coming from? What is funding it? What is agitating it? You don't have to look too far to realize that the source, unfortunately, has been the very same regime that has occupied Iran and is using our country's resources to conduct this policy of hatred and radicalism. It is this very same regime that is funding those who are attempting an attack on an Israeli embassy in London. This is the same kind of regime that is funding the hatred that we find today on campuses in Canada and in the United States. The same kind of people who side with this anti-Semitic message that is destabilizing the whole European countries. All of this is because of a regime that only thinks darkness, that celebrates martyrdom. We are the people who want to celebrate life. Every time I am in a Jewish reunion, when we toast and say L'chaim, it's about life, not death. But the irony of it is that when we talk about Mahsa Amini, when we talk about Nikah Karami and all the victims of this regime, they wanted to live. They wanted to live in peace. And if they have sacrificed, as I said in my speech, it's not just a sacrifice for our country, because we realize that by changing Iran, we're changing the whole region and the whole world. That's why they deserve the support that they have not yet to receive. And that's why I think each one of us, whether we are a member of the community, we have to be able to build a very strong coalition that this time puts the final nail in the coffin of this regime.
So Yaron Lashinsky and Sarah Milgram also wanted to live, and you mentioned them in your remarks. They were invested in creating a new future between people in general, but as you mentioned, Yaron actually visited a conference regarding Iranian future, and you compared him to the young Iranian victims of Iranian terror, Iranian regime's terror, I should correct myself. The question about moving forward and inventing this future that Israeli, Jewish, Christian, Baha'i, or atheist young people deserve. Yes, true that. That has to start with the Iranian people, and as you've noted, that it's one thing for the world to stay in solidarity with the Iranian people. It's another thing, that the Iranian people have to kind of take on the brunt of the battle, and they have been taking that on for years. Right now we're seeing protests going on in Iran where truckers and gas workers and farmers are demonstrating. These demonstrations happen frequently, and more frequently, calls for regime change are part of these demonstrations. These demonstrations are no different than that. Israel has helped bring Iran to the weakest point since 1979. It has decimated Hamas, it has decimated Hezbollah, both Iranian proxies. It has damaged the regime's air defenses, the economy is in trouble, the real is through the roof. So the question, as it is with every protest, is how does this protest fit in with the rest? Is this the moment of change, in your view?
I truly believe that we are at a time where the planets have so-called aligned, and this is a window of opportunity not to miss, because such windows don't remain or last forever. This is crucial to realize that this is the perfect opportunity to intervene and finally put the regime in its place and to the trash bin of history. I'm not saying this as a slogan. I really think that the remedy ultimately is regime change. Now, I say this for a purpose. The problem is that recent changes in the Middle East did not have necessarily the best outcome. And I know that every time there's talk about a change of regime, some people premise, they say, oh my God, another adventure in Afghanistan, or what happened in Iraq, and so on and so forth. Or we have to yet again send our troops there, and the taxpayers are going to say we'd rather spend our money elsewhere, and so what this is all about. In which I answer, look, in the scenario of change in Iran, we neither require your boots, nor do we require your money. What we require is your ability to distinguish between who are your true partners and add to the campaign of maximum pressure, parallel to it, a campaign of maximum support. Because on that basis, you empower the Iranian people and get them a better chance to fight an extremely repressive and brutal regime. And many times in recent history, we have seen that none of the movements that ultimately led to the collapse of their respective regimes happened without, at some moment, the tacit support of freedom-loving countries that helped them ultimately succeed. We saw that in the case of the Solidarity movement in Poland, the Lech Walesa. We saw that in the case of many of the former Eastern Bloc countries in Europe at the collapse of the Soviet Union, even in South Africa, and that I don't see why Iran should be the exception. In fact, Iran is best placed to usher in this new era. But I think there's also a question that we need to be able to answer. And that's one of the reasons I included, parallel to our political efforts, the idea of Iran Prosperity Project. Because I think this is where we can tell Iranians and the rest of the world that post-regime collapse, there won't be a vacuum. Post-regime collapse, there won't be anarchy. Post-regime collapse is not something that will let you to say, at least this is the devil we know, but we don't know what's going to happen next. And frankly, I think hesitation occurs at the time that people are concerned about what will happen next. Will it get worse or could it get better? But we need to convince people and persuade them to understand the mechanics of how and what we propose, because that's where the alternative starts truly gelling. And of course, we are able to do that. It would be easier then to expect the Iranian people to even risk more and sacrifice more. But I think the moment it is clear that the alternative is gelling, we can also expect more and more defections from the regime to that side. This doesn't happen automatically. It needs to be worked at. It's really a project. That's why we're talking about these things. That's what we need to be able to address every area that we need, whether it is gaining the support of foreign countries, what the diaspora can do and what role it can play, and certain governments can certainly put even more pressure on the regime. Let me give you a tacit example. I'm glad to see that the government of Canada decided to prescribe the IRGC as a terrorist organization. And Canada is hosting the next round of G7 meetings pretty soon. I think it's time to tell the Europeans, you also have to reset your foreign policy. We should also join this prescribing, for starters, and then what else can be done to help the cause in Iran. You alluded to the fact that as we speak, for the past few days, we've seen that in Iran there are demonstrations and work stoppages occurring. The truck drivers, I'm sure a lot of you have heard. but we need more solidarity at home. People really need to come to the help because a lot of these people are extremely impoverished, and we need to be able to cut them some slack and try to be able to help them. We need to find clever way of getting the kind of funding to help those labor strikes, because I think that's the quickest way. That's the quickest way to paralyze the regime with the least cost to the nation. Now, when you talk about this with, for instance, the current administration back in America and the MAGA movement and America First and all that, I said, look, this is not Iraq we're proposing. You don't need to worry about sending your troops. Our troops, our boots on the ground are the Iranian people. You're worried about spending money? You don't need to. Why don't you repurpose the frozen assets of the Iranian regime that belongs to the people of Iran in the first place and spend it on them rather than... So imagine the difference between giving this regime an extra $200 billion that they shouldn't have had, that they got under the Biden administration, as opposed to the opposite. You're changing the playing field, or at least you're equalizing it. That's what I mean by resetting policies. Because look at Europe today. With all these radical extremists that are there, they're changing the entire landscape in Europe. They're forcing people to react to the other extreme of almost a fascist conflict as a result of people being afraid and tired of this influx of more and more radicalism. Again, because the root cause and the root funding of it still is back in Tehran. I'm not saying also Tehran, unfortunately, there's a lot of Qatari money also involved, but at least over the last 4 decades, it's been principally Iran. So where are we at? It's impossible to explain to people what is the solution if they keep looking the wrong way. And for 40 years, they've been looking the wrong way. So we need to really impress upon them that instead of expecting behavior change by the representative of this regime that in its DNA cannot coexist at the same level of comprehension with such a conflict of values with the free world, as opposed to a nation that embraces the very same principles. A nation committed to peace for the same values. Many Iranians who have to flee Iran because of the immediate persecution that they face. Jews, Baha'is, what's happening to the Christian community today, all of this comes back to the nature of this regime and how easily we can reclaim our liberties and our freedoms in a different Iran by a government that cares about the people. Not Khomeini, who says we don't give a damn about Iran, I have no emotions to it, as was said earlier. That's the difference. It's all based on understanding that the commonality of values is what puts us together. But as you said, Len, it's not enough to talk about it. We have to work it. We have to make it happen. So initiative is very important. I hope to be able to at least address some areas that we can be effective, but I think it is greatly important today, as I said in this window of opportunity, that everyone can play a distinct role in this. Those who can help us from a view of expertise with the Prosperity Project, those who can help us with advocacy and putting more pressure on governments to respond to our collective ask, coordinate this effort. In my 5-point plan, I don't know how many of you have followed it, maybe there's not enough time to get into the details, but it also includes how can we first help the people at home, can we mobilize our community, how we can go beyond the G7, the G20 to redress their foreign policy, help usher in an era where we have the element, two foreign external elements, that is the maximum pressure and the maximum support. And that, in my opinion, will lead much quicker to the maximum defection we need to minimize any last bastion of resistance that this regime can throw at us. And I'm guaranteeing you that if that happens, our chance of success is near 100%.
On that note, maximum pressure versus maximum support. I've heard you talk about this idea that in order for us to get to that day after the regime, the Iranian people have to go from hope to belief. What do you mean?
It's very simple. It's one thing to say, we hope for a better world, we hope for a better future. And I tell them, listen, really think about Iran's natural resources and humongous amount of ingenious talent that it has. So we have nothing lacking in terms of human resources and natural resources. So rather than hoping whether we'll get there, we better believe that it can be done. And that's the difference between being passive and becoming proactive. But again, a national project is a collective project. Everybody have to do what he or she can in their own lane. It's a distribution of tasks. It's a coordination of efforts. And that way we are maximizing the participation, getting the best possible help from people who have this or that talent here and there. And that's how you maximize the chance of success, by engaging the maximum number of people that can be effective. So that's my philosophy of how can we, A, insist on the importance of unity while recognizing that there is diversity and we are not always in agreement with everything, which is fine and is normal. That's why we have elections, because at the end of the day, a majority has to decide, right? It's the same thing all over the world. But Iran's freedom is a national goal that transcends party politics, ideology, or anything that has to do with having a particular affiliation to a viewpoint. It is truly a national project, and our message of unity has to resonate. We have to demonstrate that we are in fact capable of doing that, because that's again what will bring back the element of faith and trust, not only of our own citizenry, but also everybody that is observing the dynamic of change in Iran. And that's the quickest path to get that support. But it all starts from Iranians themselves. And there's those who understand that and are willing to help us. And I believe we have a lot of support coming from our Israeli counterpart. And that's very important. And I hope we can build on that and get others to join us in this quest.
Last question, Your Highness. You mentioned your visit to the Western Wall, your trip to Israel. Not long after your visit, you spoke to a Jewish group in Washington, and you said something very profound, and I just want to echo it here, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. You said, "There's a temple that needs to be rebuilt. Iran is our temple." And you asked that audience to stand with the Iranian people in helping the Iranian people rebuild the temple. There may be members of the Canadian government listening in, watching. There may be people of goodwill all around the world who are wondering what they can do to help Iranians rebuild their temple. What do you think is the best thing that people of goodwill can do to help Iranians?
Well, first help us eliminate this regime once and for all. And I say this only because it will be impossible. Imagine if you have American entrepreneurs or industrialists, Canadian entrepreneurs or industrialists, all the opportunities that after we clean up shop and bring Iran back on all the standards that is expected to be an investable country, one of the last frontiers for this kind of investment that our country needs to rebuild itself and to incentivize the people who are willing to come and help us rebuild Iran. They would love to do this, but not under the current circumstances. So it is inevitable that in order to create those opportunities, which is also good in terms of the economic interest that exists for governments helping us free our country, to provide in return these opportunities. That is good. It's a win-win scenario. It's good for us and for you. It will not happen so long as the regime is still there. So the priority to get there sooner, to provide these opportunities, to impact Iranians and change their life and improve their life and put them back on the track of prosperity and progress. And for other countries to benefit from that relationship, we must first get rid of this regime. And that's something that could be very soon, depending on how committed we are. As I said in my speech, you can either expedite the process by helping us now, or delay and prolong this by continuing to expect a change of behavior and cutting a deal with this mafia-like regime that keeps killing people at home and propagating its venomous radical ideology across the world. If by now you haven't figured it out, then frankly, I'm lost for words. But I think they know it. The question is, where is the courage and determination? You know, I often say, and I said this at my last point, in the last century at least, there were two instances that there was a significant change in the world. And a lot of it had to do because in representing the free world, when I'm thinking the first conflict, the Second World War, could it have happened the way it unfolded without having a strong leadership in Washington and in London between Roosevelt and Churchill? Later on, what put an end to the Soviet Union? Wasn't it because Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher played a critical role in bringing that process to an end? The question we should ask ourselves, beyond what Israelis and Iranians can do, but something beyond our control, where is that strong leadership that, in my opinion, is lacking? Where's the nerve? Where's the courage? Because we know those who stand with the side of evil, but those who want to stand on the truth, and we say, pick your partners carefully. We are your true partners, not this murderous regime that kills its own citizenry with no mercy. What are you hesitating for? If by now you haven't recognized who are your true partners, then we better convince them even harder. But if they believe that's the case, then it's the time to act. Because the more you prolong it, the more consequences it would have. Look at Europe today. They have problems with immigration, they have problems with energy. A problem easily solved by reversing that process, if things change in the Middle East, stopping that influx of even further refugees, and problems they might have with energy dependence. Iran is sitting on tremendous amount of gas reserves that can easily supply the energy requirement of the West without having to worry about any blackmail attempted by, let's say, Moscow or some other things. I'm being really practical and real when I propose this, but which Iran is going to do that for you? Which Iran can provide that? And also in our own advantage and interest. These are tangible things to talk about. But we cannot achieve that result if decision makers, if policy makers, if government officials don't look past the current status quo and are only fixated on the regime and not beyond. We need to convince them that after 44 years or 46 years, you have given this regime ample chance to come clean. It hasn't, for good reason. So now it's time to reset your foreign policy. While there is still time, before you had to go to the more extreme, less likable solution. And on that, I'd like to stress the importance of, and I hope you can help me with this message as well, because often we hear that, well, we shall attempt diplomacy. But if diplomacy fails, okay, let's go bomb the hell out of them and strike their military installations and what have you. What happened in between to invest on the Iranian people at your solution? What happened on giving the Iranian people a chance to bring about that change so you don't have to then resort to have to strike Iran? So that's part of our message to the outside world. Iran and the Iranian people, once freed, will take away all of the concerns you currently have. First and foremost, the existential threat that the regime poses for Israel, and beyond that, reverse this whole cycle of radicalization and disruption from the Houthis and maritime traffic to proxies in Lebanon and elsewhere, to this venomous message of hate that is spreading now in Western universities, and get us back on track. The quickest path to that, and the quickest way to eliminate collectively all this problem, is help the Iranian people liberate themselves. Again, I stress that as Iranians, and I'm telling them, as I'm telling you right now, we should never ever count on anything other than our own resolve and determination. But our message to the world is, if you want less blood to be spilled in Iran, if you want less people to die for the cause of freedom, then stand with them, help them, support them. That's the final word. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Highness. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Crown Prince. Everybody here loves you, Your Highness. Jewish and Iranians together. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, the Crown Prince, Reza Pahlavi. Thank you to Len Khodorkovsky, to all of the volunteers, to Emily Schrader, to Cyrus and Sophie Millman, and everybody for coming tonight. Thank you so much.